The HOA violation notice taped to my front door on that freezing January morning in Riverside, Ohio wasn't just annoying, it was absurd. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug steaming in the 15-degree air, reading the complaint 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Apparently, my heating system was creating excessive noise pollution that violated community standards set forth in Section 12.4 of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association bylaws. I'm Yates Yardley, and I'd lived in this cookie-cutter suburban development for exactly 8 months. When my wife divorced me last year and took the house in Columbus, I'd needed somewhere affordable to start over. Riverside Meadows seemed perfect, quiet streets, decent neighbors, and most importantly, a 3-bedroom ranch within my budget. Nobody mentioned that the HOA president was a tyrant with too much time on her hands. The notice demanded I appear before the HOA board in 3 days to address the violation or face a $500 fine. $500 because my furnace was doing its job keeping me from freezing to death. I went back inside and listened carefully. My HVAC system was humming away in the basement, no louder than any other modern heating unit. It was a brand new installation, too. The previous owners had replaced it just before selling. The inspector had praised its efficiency and quiet operation. I called my neighbor, Doug Martinez, who lived 2 houses down. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding groggy. "Doug, did you file a noise complaint about my heating system?" "What? No, man, I can barely hear anything from your place." "Why?" "HOA says I'm violating noise ordinances." Doug laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Let me guess. Patricia Osworth paid you a visit." Patricia Osworth. I'd met her exactly once during the mandatory new homeowner orientation. She was 47 years old with that distinctive haircut. You know the one. And an expression like she'd been personally offended by oxygen itself. She'd spent 90 minutes explaining rules about garbage can placement, approved paint colors, and the exact height limitations for decorative lawn ornaments. She left a notice on my door. Yeah, that's her move. She got me last summer for having my trash bins visible from the street. They were out for collection day. The garbage truck was literally 2 blocks away. What did you do? Paid the fine. Easier than fighting it. She's got the whole board in her pocket. I thanked Doug and hung up, already knowing I wasn't going to take his advice. $500 wasn't pocket change for me, especially with lawyer bills from the divorce still coming in monthly. More than that, the principle of the thing gnawed at me. I worked as a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company. I understood noise standards, decibel levels, and building codes better than most people. My heating system wasn't violating anything except Patricia Osworth's need to control her neighbors. The next morning, I drove to Home Depot and bought a professional decibel meter for $89. It was the good kind, the one we sometimes used at work for compliance testing. I spent the entire evening taking measurements around my property. At the property line closest to Patricia's house, my heating system registered 42 decibels when running. For context, a normal conversation is about 60 decibels. A refrigerator hum is around 40. I was well within any reasonable noise ordinance. I documented everything with photos and video, time-stamped, and GPS tagged. Then, I did some research into Ohio noise ordinances and the specific bylaws of Riverside Meadows. Section 12.4 stated that excessive and unreasonable noise was prohibited, but it didn't define what qualified as excessive. The county ordinance specified that residential noise couldn't exceed 55 decibels during daytime hours at the property line. I had my defense prepared. I wasn't worried about the HOA meeting anymore. That confidence lasted until the following afternoon when I was leaving for work. Patricia was standing at the end of my driveway, wearing a puffy winter coat and holding a clipboard. Her silver sedan was parked on the street behind her, engine running. "Mr. Yardley," she called out as I walked to my truck. "I wanted to discuss your upcoming hearing. Mrs. Osworth, I'll see you at the meeting. I've got evidence that my heating system is well within legal limits." Her smile was thin and sharp. The HOA has its own standards. County ordinances are minimums, not maximums. We maintain a higher quality of life here in Riverside Meadows. My furnace is quieter than a normal conversation. Several neighbors have complained about the disturbance. "Which neighbors?" She clutched her clipboard tighter. "That information is confidential to protect the privacy of community members. So you're saying I can't face my accusers? This isn't a trial, Mr. Yardley. This is a community standards hearing. I suggest you adjust your attitude before Monday evening." She turned and walked back to her car, leaving me standing in my driveway, anger rising in my chest. The way she emphasized, "adjust your attitude," made it clear this wasn't really about my heating system at all. This was about power and submission. I sat in my truck for a minute, watching her drive away. That's when I heard the loud, buzzing whine of a two-stroke engine. I looked around and spotted the HOA's landscaping crew 3 houses down, using gas-powered leaf blowers to clear someone's driveway. The noise was incredible, easily 70 or 80 decibels. I could hear it clearly even with my truck windows up. An idea formed in my head. I pulled out of my driveway and parked down the street, then grabbed my new decibel meter and phone from the passenger seat. The landscaping crew was still working. 2 men with leaf blowers strapped to their backs, clearing leaves and debris from the Hendersons' property. The trucks had Riverside Meadows HOA Landscaping Services printed on the side. I walked along the public sidewalk, staying on community property, and took readings. 78 decibels at the property line, 82 decibels from the sidewalk. I recorded video of the trucks, the workers, and the meter readings. The timestamp showed it was 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon. Over the next 3 days, I became intimately familiar with the HOA landscaping crew schedule. They worked Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, servicing different properties throughout Riverside Meadows. Every single day, they used leaf blowers, edgers, and other gas-powered equipment that produced noise levels between 70 and 90 decibels. I documented it all. I also noticed something interesting. On Friday morning, the crew showed up at Patricia Osworth's house at 8:15. They spent 3 hours doing meticulous work on her lawn, hedges, and flower beds. The leaf blowers ran almost continuously for 90 minutes. At the property line between her house and her neighbors, I recorded sustained noise levels of 85 decibels. Her neighbor was an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who I'd chatted with a few times at the mailbox. I knocked on her door that afternoon. "Hello, Yates," she said warmly. "Come in, it's freezing out there." "I don't want to intrude, Mrs. Chen. I just had a quick question." "Does the landscaping noise from next door ever bother you?" Her expression shifted slightly. "Oh well, it's the HOA crew, so I suppose it's allowed." "But does it bother you?" She glanced toward Patricia's house, then lowered her voice. "Between you and me, it's terribly loud. They come so early and my bedroom window faces that direction. But Patricia is the HOA president, so I certainly can't complain. What if I told you my heating system is getting fined for being too loud and it measures at 42 decibels? Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. "That's ridiculous. I can't even hear your heating system. Would you be willing to sign a statement saying that?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. I don't want trouble with Patricia. I understand. Thank you anyway, Mrs. Chen. She touched my arm as I turned to leave. Wait. Actually, yes. I'll sign something. I'm 83 years old. What's she going to do to me? I could have kissed her. Instead, I came back an hour later with a simple statement I'd typed up, confirming that she lived adjacent to Patricia Osworth, that the HOA landscaping crews produced significant noise, and that she'd never heard disruptive noise from my heating system. Mrs. Chen signed it without hesitation. The HOA meeting was held Monday evening at 7 in the community center, a bland rectangular building near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early with my laptop, documents, and a USB drive full of video evidence. The meeting room had about 30 folding chairs arranged in rows, facing a long table where the board members would sit. Patricia was already there, organizing papers and speaking quietly with 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them, Bill Henderson, whose house the landscaping crew had serviced, and Sandra Lopez, who lived on the other side of the development. The other 2 were strangers to me, residents filtered in slowly. Doug showed up and gave me an encouraging nod. Mrs. Chen came in, bundled up in a heavy coat despite the heated room. A few other neighbors I recognized by sight but not by name filled in the remaining seats. At 7 sharp, Patricia called the meeting to order. She went through standard business: first approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of snow removal contracts. Everything was approved quickly with minimal discussion. Then she reached my name on the agenda. Item 7. Noise violation, 4782 Maple Grove Drive, owner Yates Yardley. I stood up. Patricia gestured to a chair facing the board table. Mr. Yardley, you've been cited for excessive noise from your residential heating system. Multiple complaints have been filed. The board has reviewed the matter and determined that your equipment exceeds community standards. You have the opportunity to present any relevant information before we finalize the violation and associated fine. I walked to the chair with my laptop and documents. Thank you. I'd like to start by clarifying what constitutes excessive noise under both county ordinance and your own bylaws. I spent 5 minutes walking them through the legal standards, showing my research on Ohio noise regulations. Patricia's expression grew increasingly pinched. Then I presented my decibel readings. As you can see, my heating system produces 42 decibels at the property line during normal operation. This is well below the county standard of 55 decibels and quieter than ordinary conversation. I have video documentation with timestamps and GPS coordinates. I played several clips on my laptop, the screen projected onto the wall behind the board table using their meeting room equipment. The videos clearly showed my meter readings and the barely audible hum of my HVAC system. Furthermore, I have a signed statement from my immediate neighbor confirming that she's never been disturbed by noise from my property. I handed Mrs. Chen's statement to Patricia. She barely glanced at it. The board appreciates your preparation, Mr. Yardley, but as I mentioned at your home, county standards are minimums. We hold our community to higher expectations. What specific standard am I violating? The reasonable judgment of community members who have complained. Who are these complainants? I'd like to address their concerns directly. That's confidential. How can I defend myself against anonymous accusations? Sandra Lopez leaned forward. Mr. Yardley, this isn't a criminal trial. The HOA board has discretion to interpret and enforce community standards as we see fit. If we've received complaints, we investigate. We've determined there's merit to the concerns. Based on what evidence? You haven't taken any measurements. You haven't documented anything. You're just taking someone's word that my heating system is too loud when objective data proves it isn't. Patricia's voice turned cold. Your tone is noted, Mr. Yardley. This board won't be spoken to with disrespect. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm asking for basic fairness. The fine stands. $500 due within 30 days. If the noise continues after that period, additional daily fines will accrue. Then I'd like to file a formal complaint. She blinked. Excuse me, a formal noise complaint against the HOA landscaping services. I set up my next video compilation. For the next 10 minutes, I showed them footage from the past week, their landscaping crews using leaf blowers, edgers, and other equipment. Each clip showed the decibel meter and readings between 70 and 90 decibels. I included multiple properties, multiple times of day, and a special extended segment from Patricia's own house. As you can see, the HOA contracted landscaping services regularly exceed county noise ordinances by 20 to 35 decibels. That's 6 times louder than my heating system. If we're truly concerned about community noise standards, this seems like the place to start. The room had gone very quiet. Patricia's face was red. The landscaping services are essential for community maintenance, she said tightly. So is my heating system. It's January in Ohio. Landscaping is temporary. My heating system only runs intermittently. Your landscapers run their equipment continuously for hours. Bill Henderson cleared his throat. Patricia, he kind of has a point. She shot him a look that could have frozen water. The landscaping schedule has been approved by this board for 3 years running. That doesn't make it exempt from the same noise standards you're trying to enforce against me, I said. Unless this is selective enforcement, which would be a problem. Sandra Lopez spoke up. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Yardley? I'm suggesting that if my heating system violates community standards at 42 decibels, then the landscaping services definitely violate them at 80 plus decibels. Apply the rules equally or acknowledge that my system isn't actually a problem. Patricia stood up abruptly. This board will take your complaint under advisement. The fine against your property still stands pending further review. I want a formal vote, I said. What? On my fine? The bylaws state that violation fines require a majority board vote. I want it on record. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the bylaws were clear. I'd read them thoroughly. She glanced at the other board members. Fine. All in favor of upholding the $500 fine against 4782 Maple Grove Drive for noise violations. Patricia raised her hand immediately. After a long pause, Sandra Lopez raised hers. The other 3 board members, including Bill Henderson, kept their hands down. The motion fails, Bill said quietly. 3-2 against. Patricia's expression was murderous. This meeting is adjourned. People filed out slowly, several neighbors patting me on the shoulder or giving me thumbs up. Doug caught up with me in the parking lot. Holy hell, man. That was amazing. Nobody's ever stood up to her like that. She's not going to let this go, I said. Probably not. But you got the fine killed. Take the win. He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a powerful enemy. Patricia's parting glare had promised consequences. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I received a new violation notice, this time for improper storage of trash receptacles. My bins were allegedly visible from the street outside of collection hours. I checked. They were in my garage, completely out of sight. The day after that, another notice arrived citing unauthorized modifications to exterior paint color. I hadn't painted anything. The house was the exact same beige it had been when I bought it. On Friday, I got a third notice about my mailbox being non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. It was a standard black mailbox, identical to 20 other mailboxes on my street. Patricia was harassing me with bogus violations, and she was being sloppy about it. Each notice was easily disprovable, but each one threatened fines and required written responses with supporting documentation. It was death by paperwork. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, comparisons with neighbors' properties. I filed formal responses to each violation, CCing every board member and keeping meticulous records. Then I got smart. I filed my own violation reports. Patricia's mailbox had a small decorative American flag that extended half an inch above the height restriction. Violation reported. Her trash bins were visible from the street for approximately 15 minutes on Thursday morning before she moved them. Violation reported. The paint on her front door trim was a slightly different shade than her shutters, creating an aesthetic inconsistency. Violation reported. I filed 8 violations against Patricia's property over 2 weeks, each one as petty and technical as the ones she'd filed against me. I used the exact same language from the bylaws, cited the same sections, and demanded the same documentation she required from me. Doug thought it was hilarious. "You're playing her game better than she does." "I'm just following the rules," I said innocently. The retaliation escalated. Patricia started driving past my house multiple times daily. She'd slow down, sometimes stopping to take pictures of my property. She was looking for anything she could use. I installed security cameras front door, backyard, and driveway. All cloud connected with continuous recording. $200 at Costco, worth every penny for peace of mind. That's when things got weird. The first incident happened on a Tuesday night. I came home from work at 6:30 to find a notice on my door about excessive outdoor lighting disturbing neighbors. The thing was, I barely had any outdoor lighting, just a porch light and a motion sensor floodlight over the garage. I checked my security footage. At 4:15 that afternoon, Patricia had walked up my driveway, looked around carefully, then placed the notice on my door. But here's the interesting part: at 4:07, just 8 minutes earlier, someone else had been on my property. A man I didn't recognize, wearing a landscaping company uniform, had walked around my house with what looked like a light meter or some kind of measuring device. He'd spent several minutes pointing it at my outdoor lights, taking readings. Then he'd gotten into an unmarked white van and driven away. Patricia had contracted someone to measure my outdoor lighting so she could file a violation. I saved that footage and kept watching. Over the next week, I caught the same pattern 3 more times. Different people, different violations being measured or documented. She was building cases against me, manufacturing evidence to support her harassment campaign. I took everything to an attorney, a guy named Robert Chen, who Mrs. Chen had recommended. He was her grandson, practiced real estate law in Columbus, and agreed to review my case. "This is pretty clear-cut harassment," Robert said, reviewing my documentation in his office. His workspace was organized chaos, law books and case files stacked everywhere. "You've got video evidence of targeted enforcement, retaliatory violations, and what looks like trespassing for the purpose of manufacturing complaints. What are my options?" Sue the HOA. "Selective enforcement, harassment, violation of your property rights. You'd have a decent case." "How much would that cost?" he grimaced. "Honestly, more than you'd probably win. HOA cases are expensive, time-consuming, and even when you win, you're still living in a community that hates you." "So I'm stuck?" "Not necessarily. The board split on that vote, right? 3 members voted against the fine. That means Patricia doesn't have total control. If you can flip one more vote, or better yet, get her removed as president, the whole dynamic changes." How do I do that? Annual elections are coming up. HOA bylaws usually require them in the spring. You could run for the board yourself or support other candidates. Change it from the inside. It wasn't the quick solution I wanted, but it made sense. I thanked Robert and paid his consultation fee, then went home to research HOA elections. Riverside Meadows held its annual meeting and board elections the second Saturday in March. Any homeowner in good standing could run for the 5 board positions. Terms were 2 years, staggered so that either 2 or 3 positions were up for election each cycle. This year, 3 positions were open, including Patricia's. I had 6 weeks. First, I needed to understand community sentiment. I started walking my dog well. I didn't have a dog, so I borrowed Doug's golden retriever, Max, around the neighborhood each evening. It's amazing how willing people are to chat when you've got a friendly dog. The Hendersons thought Patricia was too strict, but generally effective. The Kowalskis 3 blocks over had been fined twice for garden decorations and were furious about it. The Patels had received violations for having guests park on the street during their daughter's birthday party. The Johnsons were afraid to do anything with their yard without prior HOA approval. Out of 43 families I talked to, maybe 10 were genuinely happy with Patricia's leadership. Another 15 were neutral or uninformed. The remaining 18 had grievances, some minor, some significant. That was my base. 18 families who might support change. I started attending board meetings regularly, bringing Doug and other sympathetic neighbors. We asked questions, requested clarification on policies, and generally made our presence known. Nothing disruptive, just engaged citizenship. Patricia hated it. You could see the irritation on her face every time I walked in. At the February meeting, I formally announced my intention to run for the board. So did Doug and a woman named Karen Tillman. Yes, really. A Karen running against the ultimate Karen. Karen Tillman was a retired schoolteacher, universally liked and fed up with the HOA's petty enforcement. Patricia's response was to announce her own slate of candidates herself for re-election, plus 2 allies I'll call Minions 1 and 2. They were neighbors who'd benefited from Patricia's selective enforcement, getting exemptions and special treatment. The campaign was on. I created a simple platform: fair enforcement, transparent operations, and reasonable community standards. I printed flyers on my home computer and distributed them door to door. Doug organized a meet and greet at his house where neighbors could ask questions. Karen Tillman brought homemade cookies and won over half the room with her warmth and common sense. Patricia's campaign was more professional, glossy mailers, robocalls, official-looking materials. Her message emphasized maintaining property values and preserving community standards. The subtext was clear: vote for the reformers and watch the neighborhood descend into chaos. 3 weeks before the election, Patricia escalated. I came home to find a certified letter from the HOA attorney. It claimed I owed $1,800 in accumulated fines for various violations over the past 2 months. Each bogus complaint she'd filed was listed as an unpaid fine, plus late fees and interest. The letter threatened a lien on my property if I didn't pay within 14 days. I called Robert Chen immediately. "They can't do this," he said after I explained. "You documented that all those violations were false. You filed rebuttals. Did the board vote on any of those fines?" "No, Patricia just kept sending notices." "Then these aren't valid fines." "She's abusing her authority as president. This is actually good for us." "How is being threatened with a property lien good?" "Because it's blatant overreach. We can fight this, and now we have grounds for a harassment claim that might actually stick. Let me draft a response." Robert sent a formal letter to the HOA attorney and all board members, laying out the situation and threatening legal action if the bogus fines weren't withdrawn. He cited specific Ohio statutes about HOA governance and due process requirements. The response came 3 days later. The HOA attorney, who I suspect hadn't been fully informed by Patricia about the details, withdrew the fine demand and apologized for the administrative error. Reading between the lines, I got the sense he'd chewed Patricia out for putting him in a legally vulnerable position. Small victory, but I'd take it. The last week before the election, things got dirty. Someone created a fake social media account claiming to be me, posting inflammatory comments about neighbors and making vaguely racist remarks. It was an obvious fake wrong email address. No post history, clearly manufactured, but some people didn't look that closely. I spent 2 days reporting the account and explaining to confused neighbors that it wasn't me. Doug tracked down the IP address through a tech-savvy friend. It traced back to a computer at Patricia's house. We took screenshots of everything and reported the account for impersonation. Facebook took it down within 24 hours, but the damage was partially done. Some residents believed I was unstable or hostile. Karen Tillman, bless her heart, went door to door personally vouching for my character. Mrs. Chen wrote a letter to all her friends in the neighborhood supporting the reform candidates. The momentum shifted back. Election day was tense. Voting took place from noon to 6 at the community center. Turnout was unusually high. The HOA secretary later said it was the highest participation in 12 years. By 7:30, the votes were counted. Karen Tillman won her seat decisively. Doug won his by a narrower margin, and I won mine by just 7 votes. Patricia lost. She actually lost her re-election bid, meaning she'd be completely off the board when the new members were sworn in. Her 2 allies lost as well. The board would now have 3 reform candidates, plus the 2 existing members who'd voted against my heating system fine, Bill Henderson, and a quiet guy named Tom Rutherford. We'd won. Patricia sat stiff and silent as the results were announced. When the meeting adjourned, she gathered her materials and walked out without speaking to anyone. I felt a moment of sympathy. Losing control after years of dominance couldn't be easy. But then, I remembered the fake social media account and the harassment, and the sympathy evaporated. The first new board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Patricia remained technically president until the transition. I was nervous she'd do something drastic, but the days passed quietly, too quietly. The Friday before our first meeting, Bill Henderson called me at 9 in the evening. "Yates, we have a problem. The HOA bank accounts are empty." "What?" "I'm the treasurer. I check the balances weekly. We had $47,000 in reserves on Monday. As of this afternoon, there's $800. My stomach dropped. "Where did it go?" "Multiple transfers to the landscaping company. Patricia authorized them. She signed contracts for extensive work throughout the community, paid in advance. The work hasn't been done." "That's theft." "That's what I said. I called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. We need to figure this out before the transition." The emergency meeting was tense. All 5 current board members attended, plus Robert Chen, who I'd asked to come as my attorney. Patricia sat at the head of the table, expression carefully neutral. Bill laid out the situation. Between Monday and Wednesday, Patricia authorized $46,000 in payments to Summit Landscaping Services for seasonal contracts. I wasn't consulted, none of the board was informed, and the contracts themselves appear questionable. "I have the authority as president to execute contracts on behalf of the HOA," Patricia said calmly. "The bylaws are clear. For routine maintenance, yes, Bill said. Not for nearly all our reserves without board approval. That requires a vote. These were time-sensitive negotiations. Waiting for a board meeting would have lost us favorable rates. Robert Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Osworth, can you provide copies of these contracts and proof that the services will be rendered? I don't have to provide anything to him. He's not a board member or HOA attorney. I'm here representing Mr. Yardley as an interested homeowner, but fine, I can come back with a subpoena. That got her attention. Sandra Lopez, still on the current board, spoke up. Patricia, just show us the contracts. If everything's legitimate, there's no problem. Patricia hesitated, then pulled a folder from her bag. She distributed copies of 3 contracts with Summit Landscaping Services. I skimmed mine, and my engineering background immediately spotted problems. The language was vague, using terms like comprehensive seasonal services and full-spectrum maintenance without defining specific work. The payment terms were all up front, with no deliverables or milestone payments. The company address was a P.O. box. There was no contractor's license number, no insurance certificate, no bond information. This looks like a shell company, I said. Patricia's eyes flashed. That's a serious accusation. Show me I'm wrong. What's the owner's name? Where's their physical business location? Do they have insurance? All legitimate companies. Robert Chen was already typing on his phone. Summit Landscaping Services, LLC, incorporated in Ohio 3 weeks ago. Owner listed as Michael Osworth. That's your son, isn't it, Patricia? The room went silent. Patricia's face drained of color, then flushed red. My son runs a legitimate business. There's nothing improper about the HOA contracting with him. Except the conflict of interest, Bill said quietly. And the fact that you drained our reserves into your son's newly created company for services that aren't clearly defined. This is absurd. I've served this community for 6 years. My integrity is beyond question. Then you won't mind if we pause all payments pending a review, Tom Rutherford said. He was an accountant in his day job, rarely spoke at meetings, but when he did, people listened. Bill, as treasurer, can you freeze the accounts? Already did. I called the bank yesterday and put a hold on everything pending board review. Patricia stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt. You're all bitter about the election results and you're trying to smear me. Sit down, Patricia, Sandra Lopez said. Her voice was sharp. We're going to get to the bottom of this. If everything's legitimate, like you say, then a review will clear you if it's not. She didn't finish the sentence. Patricia sat back down, rigid with anger. The investigation took 2 weeks and turned up exactly what I suspected. Summit Landscaping Services existed only on paper. They had no equipment, no employees, no insurance, and no history of any actual work. The $46,000 Patricia had transferred sat in the company account, untouched. Michael Osworth, Patricia's son, admitted under questioning that his mother had asked him to create the company and open the account. She'd told him it was for legitimate HOA work and that he'd just be holding the money temporarily until contracts were finalized. He claimed ignorance about the details, and honestly, I believed him. He seemed like a confused 30-year-old who'd done his mother a favor without understanding the implications. The HOA board voted unanimously to file a police report. The Riverside police took the complaint seriously. $46,000 was well above the threshold for felony theft. Detective Sarah Morneau was assigned to the case. She was thorough and professional, interviewing board members, reviewing documents, and examining bank records. Within a week, she'd built what she told us was a solid case for theft by deception and abuse of fiduciary duty. Patricia was arrested on a Tuesday morning in late March. I wasn't there, but Doug's house had a view of her driveway, and he told me the whole thing. 2 police cars, handcuffs, the whole procedure. She'd been led out of her house in business casual attire, looking simultaneously defiant and terrified. The HOA voted to press charges and authorized funds to hire a forensic accountant to ensure no other money was missing. The accountant found smaller irregularities going back 3 years. Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for her own landscaping, claiming it was demonstration maintenance to show other homeowners what proper lawn care looked like. Another $6,000 quietly siphoned off. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in going easy. The case was straightforward, the evidence was clear, and white-collar crime was something the county was trying to crack down on. The trial happened in late May. I attended with several other board members. Patricia looked smaller somehow, diminished in the defendant's chair. Her attorney argued that she'd intended to return the money, that it was a temporary measure to secure favorable rates, that there was no criminal intent. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted on all counts after deliberating for less than 3 hours. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge gave Patricia 2 years in prison, plus restitution of all stolen funds and court costs. He mentioned specifically that people in positions of trust who abuse that trust deserve serious consequences. Patricia's son, Michael, was given probation and community service. He cooperated fully with the investigation and genuinely seemed to have been a pawn in his mother's scheme. Meanwhile, the reformed HOA board was actually functioning like a normal organization. We revised the bylaws to require board approval for any expenditure over $5,000. We implemented transparent budgeting with monthly financial reports published to all homeowners. We rewrote the violation process to include clear standards, mandatory board votes on fines, and an appeal process. The landscaping contracts were rebid, this time with multiple companies competing and everything properly documented. We ended up saving 15% compared to what Patricia had been paying her usual vendors. Most importantly, we adopted reasonable noise standards that referenced county ordinances specifically. My heating system was, of course, completely compliant. So were most normal residential activities. The HOA contracted landscaping was limited to reasonable hours, and crews were required to use electric equipment where possible to reduce noise. Mrs. Chen told me she was sleeping better without the early morning leaf blowers next door. The community changed in other ways too. People seemed less afraid, more willing to personalize their properties and actually enjoy their homes. The Kowalskis put up garden decorations. The Patels had another birthday party with cars parked everywhere. Nobody filed violations. We were still an HOA with rules and standards, but they were reasonable rules, fairly enforced, and actually designed to maintain the community rather than control it. Doug and I became good friends through the whole experience. We'd grab beers on Friday evenings and talk about normal stuff: sports, work, his kids' school activities. It was nice to have drama-free interactions with neighbors. One evening in early June, we were sitting on his back deck, watching the sun set over the subdivision. Max the golden retriever was sprawled at our feet, tired from chasing tennis balls. "You ever think about what would have happened if you just paid that first fine?" Doug asked. "Sometimes. Would have been easier in the short term. But then Patricia would still be running things, stealing from the HOA, making everyone miserable." True. Sometimes the hard way is the right way. Deep thoughts from the guy who recorded leaf blowers to win an argument. I laughed. Hey, it worked. It really did. That was brilliant, by the way, using her own tactics against her. I just wanted my heating system to be left alone. The rest kind of snowballed. Well, I'm glad it did. This place is actually pleasant now. He was right. Riverside Meadows felt different, lighter, friendlier, more like an actual community. People waved when they saw each other. Kids played outside without parents worrying about HOA violations. It was what suburban life was supposed to be. My divorce had been finalized in April. The settlement was fair, and I'd finally stopped bleeding money on legal fees. The house in Riverside Meadows was officially mine, all mine, and I was starting to think of it as a real home rather than just a place I lived. I'd even started dating someone, a woman named Jennifer, who worked in the HR department at my company. We'd connected at a work function, discovered we both liked hiking, and things developed naturally from there. She thought the whole HOA saga was hilarious and slightly terrifying. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," she'd said when I told her the full story. "You documented everything and took down an entire HOA board. I just wanted to keep my heat on. You're very goal-oriented. It's attractive. Things were good. Really good for the first time in a long time." The HOA sent formal notice in June that all stolen funds had been recovered and deposited back into the community accounts. Michael Osworth had liquidated his shell company and returned every penny. With Patricia's restitution payments, we actually ended up with slightly more than we'd started with. The board voted to use some of the recovered funds to improve community amenities, new playground equipment, better lighting along the walking paths, and a community garden area that several residents had requested. Real improvements that people would actually use and enjoy. I ran into Sandra Lopez at the grocery store in July. She'd resigned from the board after the scandal, saying she should have caught the financial irregularities sooner. "I feel like I failed the community," she told me in the produce section. "You voted against Patricia's nonsense when it mattered," I said. "And you supported the investigation. That counts for a lot. Still, I should have been paying closer attention to the finances. We all should have. That's why we changed the system. Now it's harder for anyone to do what she did." Sandra smiled slightly. "You're very diplomatic for someone who started a revolution over a heating system. It wasn't a revolution, just basic accountability." "Well, whatever it was, thank you. My husband and I are much happier now. We're actually considering renovating our kitchen without worrying about HOA approval for every little thing." That was the best compliment the new board could receive, people feeling free to enjoy their own homes. August brought news that Patricia's appeal had been denied. She was serving her sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly, more like closure. She'd committed crimes and was facing consequences. The system had worked. Michael Osworth moved out of state, I heard from the neighborhood gossip network. Probably needed a fresh start away from the scandal. I didn't blame him. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Work was going well. I'd gotten a promotion and a raise, which helped with the budget after all the legal expenses. My relationship with Jennifer was developing nicely. Nothing rushed, but definitely promising. The house needed some updates, and now I could make them without HOA drama. I even got a dog, a rescue mutt named Cooper, who looked like a terrier mixed with maybe 15 other breeds. He gave me a real reason to walk the neighborhood, and he got along great with Max. Doug joked that we were becoming those guys, the middle-aged dudes whose social lives revolved around their dogs. He wasn't wrong, and I was fine with it. The first anniversary of the original noise violation notice came and went in January. I marked it by taking new decibel measurements of my heating system, just for fun. Still 42 decibels. Still quieter than a conversation. Still perfectly legal. I'd kept all my documentation from the whole saga: videos, recordings, measurements, correspondence. Partly for legal protection, but partly as a reminder. The folder on my computer was labeled HOA Wars, and sometimes I'd scroll through it, remembering the absurdity of the whole situation. A heating system complaint that led to uncovering embezzlement and corruption. Property association drama that ended in criminal convictions. It sounded like fiction, but it had all really happened, right here in this quiet Ohio subdivision. The current HOA board was functioning smoothly. We'd recruited new members, including Mrs. Chen's daughter Lisa, who brought marketing expertise and fresh perspectives. The monthly meetings were brief and boring, which was exactly what they should be. We approved routine maintenance, reviewed finances, discussed community events, and went home. No drama, no power trips, no harassment campaigns. I served out my 2-year term and decided not to run for re-election. I'd done what I needed to do: fix the broken system. Now, it was time to let other people maintain it while I focused on my own life. Jennifer and I got engaged in the spring, 2 years after the whole HOA saga started. We were planning a fall wedding, small ceremony, family and close friends only. Doug was going to be a groomsman. Mrs. Chen had already insisted on helping with flowers. We talked about whether to stay in my house or look for something new. Jennifer liked Riverside Meadows, liked the neighbors and the community. Plus, you've got sweat equity here, she joked. You literally reformed the HOA, can't walk away from that investment. She had a point. The house felt like mine in a way the old place with my ex-wife never had. I'd fought for it, improved it, made it a real home. We decided to stay, maybe add an addition in a few years when we needed more space. The final bit of closure came in September when I got a letter from the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. Patricia Osworth had been moved to a minimum security facility after completing 18 months with good behavior. She'd be eligible for early release in another 6 months. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Part of me thought she'd gotten off easy 2 years for stealing $50,000+ and harassing countless neighbors seemed light. But another part recognized that prison time, even reduced, was significant consequences. Her reputation was destroyed, her position lost, her life fundamentally altered. Justice didn't always mean maximum punishment. Sometimes it just meant accountability and preventing future harm. I threw the letter away and went outside to play with Cooper. It was a beautiful afternoon, warm but not hot, with a light breeze rustling the trees. My heating system was silent, obviously, because it was 78 degrees out. But when winter came and it fired up again, it would hum along at 42 decibels, warming my home, breaking exactly 0 laws and bothering exactly 0 neighbors. All because I'd refused to accept an unjust fine and had been willing to document my case. Sometimes standing up for yourself leads to bigger changes than you ever intended. Sometimes fighting over a heating system means taking down a corrupt HOA president. Sometimes recording leaf blowers is the first step toward actual justice. And sometimes, in a cookie-cutter subdivision in Riverside, Ohio, one stubborn mechanical engineer with a decibel meter and a determination to be right can change an entire community for the better. My heating system was never too loud. The HOA was just too corrupt. But that problem was fixed now, and the only noise in Riverside Meadows these days was the normal, happy sound of people living their lives without fear of petty violations and power-drunk board presidents. I'd take that over silence any day. Cooper barked at a squirrel, tail wagging frantically. I laughed and threw his ball across the yard, watching him bound after it with ridiculous enthusiasm. Jennifer would be home from work soon. Doug was coming over for dinner. Life was good, genuinely good, in a way it hadn't been for years. All because I'd stood my ground over 42 decibels and refused to let someone bully me into submission. The heating system complaint seemed like ancient history now, a weird story I'd tell at parties. But the principles behind it, fairness, accountability, standing up to abuse of power, those mattered. Those had always mattered, and in the end those principles had won. The HOA said my heating system was too noisy, so I recorded their leaf blowers. But what I really recorded was evidence of corruption, selective enforcement, and the kind of petty tyranny that flourishes when good people don't push back. I pushed back. We all did, and we won. That's the story. That's the whole thing, from bogus noise violation to criminal conviction to community reform to my own happy ending. It was messy and frustrating and sometimes scary, but it was worth it. Every time my furnace kicks on, I smile. 42 decibels, perfect temperature, 0 violations. Exactly as it should be.